Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas, here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us on Law for the People. We come to you, like was mentioned earlier, every Friday from 1 to 3 Central Standard Time. And as always, my brief disclaimer is that when we talk about the law, we're usually talking about Texas law and or federal law. So just always kind of take that into consideration, because we are heard by other states and certainly even other countries, right, Fern? So
that is correct.
We're international, so that's
Yes,
that's always a good thing. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon. We've got a couple of wonderful guests this afternoon. The first of which is Mr. Hector Garza, who is actually running for judge here in Dallas County on the 195th Judicial District. Why don't I just allow you to introduce yourself, Hector, say hello to the folks, and just kind of give us a sense of what it is you're doing here.
Hey, good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon, Eric, Fern. Thank you for having me. And basically, I'm running for judge. It's the 195th Criminal District Court, Judicial District Court here in Dallas County. It's a criminal court. It's at the Frank Crowley Courthouse. And basically what it does, the judge would hear anything from a felony DWI up to capital murder. So, August 13th, I became the Democratic nominee. And, so the last few weeks we've been out campaigning and in the trail, getting people to know me. So I appreciate you having me here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting people to know you. You're not necessarily a politician, Hector, and I kind of wanted to point that out. You're running for judge, kind of something different. Although here in the state of Texas, you actually have to run for judge. In a lot of states, you don't actually necessarily have to run. So it's kind of like a political position. You got to get the voters to kind of vote for you. You mentioned earlier the Democratic primary, and then you kind of got selected in that way. That was a really interesting process. And tell us a little bit about why the opening in the 195th and how it's kind of come about that they would need to bring somebody along to run for the office.
Okay, so the sitting judge in the 195th, Fred Tinsley, he decided to retire in July of this year.
Okay.
And basically, when he announced his retirement, people started, vying for the position to become, because it would give the opportunity for both parties, the Republicans and the Democratic Party, to put up a nominee in the November 8th general election.
Right.
And so what happened on the Democratic side, I'm a lifelong Democrat, so I had met some precinct chairs. I'd been involved with the party from before for a long time. And so basically what I did was I talked to my wife. We discussed it, and decided that I would seek the party's nomination. There was 6 other candidates. At one point, there was a rumor there was going to be like 11 candidates. Yeah. But on August 13th, all the precinct chairs got together at an executive committee meeting on August 13th, and they all voted me to become, out of 7 people, me to be the Democratic nominee that's going to be representing the party at the November 8th election.
Okay. Okay. Just so people who are kind of listening in kind of know just some background with respect to what kind of Dallas County looks like. Relatively recently, we kind of went, predominantly Democrat, relatively recently. And since then, the Democratic individual running for whatever office that might be might have a slight, nod in terms of having the ability to win the election. But with that, you do have a Republican candidate on the other side, somebody that you're actually going up against in the general election. Tell us a little bit about, if you could, just generally your history, Hector, kind of what kind of got you to where you're able to run for judge, why you think you're kind of qualified to run for judge, and then we'll talk a little bit about the process.
Okay. Well, my passion has always been criminal law. I decided to go to law school because I was going to be a criminal defense attorney. I grew up in the Oak Cliff area. I was born and raised here in Dallas and grew up in Oak Cliff. And, just based on some of the injustices that I saw and heard about, I was going to go out there, go to law school, correct some of those injustices, hold, the government, people accountable for, for taking advantage of the less fortunate or whatnot. Yeah. And I started my career, even in undergrad, I was working with criminal defense attorneys so I could learn my trade.
Right.
I continued that in law school, working with criminal defense attorneys, some of the best ones here in the state of Texas, some of them that teach CLEs and whatnot. And but I also got the opportunity to intern at the district attorney's office when I was in law school. And it kind of changed after that internship. It changed my perspective, and it got me to see like how much of a difference maker I could be if I was working at the district attorney's office. So I did defense work. I was a criminal defense student. I had my student bar card, and then in a period, I graduated in 2005. I did some defense work in between, but I've worked as an assistant district attorney for over 10 years here in Dallas County, my community where I grew up in. And when I talk about some of the differences that I could make, is I could, prosecutors have so much power. I could review a case, and if it doesn't meet the threshold, if it's not a good case, I'll dismiss it. If it's a person that needs rehabilitation because they have a mental illness or a drug problem, then I help them with that. Yeah. And it's not just a mentality, because of my background and experience, it's not just a mentality that just lock them up and throw away the key.
Right.
It's one of those things where I've done everything at the district attorney's office, all the way from trying a misdemeanor DWI case to a capital murder.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a chief prosecutor I was a chief prosecutor up for the last 5 years, since 2011, up until I resigned my position at the DA's office this month.
Let's talk about that, Hector. Sometimes we have, as attorneys, we sit and we talk, and we know what we're talking about, and we know the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. And quite honestly, lots of folks who are listening may not really realize that, may not really glean what it is you're talking about in terms of being a felony prosecutor. Generally, when you start at the DA's office, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're kind of starting out or you're coming out of law school and you start with them, you're going to start in I would imagine, a misdemeanor court, or relatively not as high crime that people might be listening to, so that you kind of get your feet wet. You kind of start learning about the process. Maybe the cases aren't quite as the jail time isn't as long and things of that nature. So tell us how you kind of started out. You mentioned 2005. You went directly to the DA's office, and kind of started in what court? What were you kind of doing at the beginning?
Yeah, so basically, I graduated law school, and actually it was about a week before the bar exam that I got a call from the district attorney's office. At the time, it was Bill Hill. I've worked under 3 different administrations now, but I got a job offer the week before the bar exam. So I accepted. I said, upon me passing the bar exam, I would go work at the district attorney's office. And I actually got an opportunity to start work in October, so about a month before we actually got bar results. They were doing that at the time, where they were offering those positions. But yeah, we started at the misdemeanor court. Started in family violence with simple assaults, family violence assaults, and misdemeanor at the misdemeanor level, where the punishment ranges would be no more than a year in the county jail.
Okay.
And so that's what differentiates between a misdemeanor and a felony. At a misdemeanor, you're looking at a maximum of a Class A misdemeanor, a year in the county jail, and up to a $4,000 fine.
Okay.
When you're talking about felonies, now you're talking about either state jail or up to, obviously prison time, going to TDC. So, but I worked my way up through, through trying misdemeanor cases, some assault cases, DWIs, criminal mischiefs, criminal trespasses, all those misdemeanors. Worked my way up. Obviously, you get reviewed every time you take a step up. Start off at the very bottom level of the misdemeanor, worked up to a misdemeanor chief of one of my courts. So I was misdemeanor chief of several courts, where I was not only prosecuting misdemeanor cases, but I was also supervising other attorneys.
Okay. So being a chief is kind of that. You're supervising other junior attorneys.
Junior attorneys, and it's also your docket. You're responsible for the docket.
Okay.
So did that, and then I promoted up to the felony level, and at the time they were starting you off at grand jury intake, where you're actually reviewing the cases that any law enforcement agency or police officer, police department file with the office. You review them, see if there's probable cause to present them to a grand jury, or you just reject them, or send them back for further investigation. So I did that, presented cases to grand juries, and then I got moved. It was March of 2007 when March of 2007 when I got was made the number 3 in a felony court.
Okay.
And as a number 3, you're a brand new felony court prosecutor, but you're still handling any type of felony, and then your chief prosecutor will give you maybe a murder or two. So, they have to see how you feel about that. So, worked my way, tried different cases, and then I started getting murder cases.
Yeah.
In 2008, I got promoted to being a gang unit prosecutor.
Okay.
So I did that for about 2.5 years. and prosecuted gang members who committed murders and drive-by shootings and stuff like that.
So very serious stuff.
Very serious stuff. And then in 2011, I became the chief of a felony court, the 204th Judicial District Court. And ever since then, I've kind of been moving around to different chief positions. I was a chief prosecutor in the state jail unit where I supervised 5 different prosecutors. And then I even made it all the way up to an administrative chief where I supervised the entire misdemeanor division, and, which is about 36 prosecutors, several investigators, and legal staff. So.
We've actually had Judge Lina Lavario on the show before, last time she was running for office, and I can't tell you how highly she speaks of you. I think you're in her court or kind of practicing out of her court for a period of time. And quite honestly, Hector, everyone that I've kind of spoken with and all the other individual, we don't do that much criminal. I haven't done that much criminal in a very long time. When I first started out, I was kind of, on the wheel in San Antonio for a period of time, kind of trying to make ends meet. But since then, haven't had a lot of exposure to the criminal practice. But everybody that I talk to, everybody that's kind of met of you or been introduced to you, have nothing but great things to say. So we're going to get back into talking a little bit more about the run for judge and your specific, background with respect to criminal work and things of that nature. But on the show, what we like to do is kind of get a sense of who it is we're talking to. Let people kind of get a good understanding of what you're all about. And for me, and it's probably just because it's me, I think the biggest part of who I am and what I've become is really comes from my family, comes from my folks, the way I was raised, my mother and my father. So why don't we start there? Why don't we start about with your folks? What is it they do? Are they from Dallas?
Well, my parents actually came to this country, undocumented. At one point, they did eventually get their citizenship back in the 80s. But I kind of saw, and by no means was I always the perfect student or the best student. I was always a smart kid, but sometimes got into trouble or whatnot. But my parents were always there to straighten me out. My mom was always, going to school, talking to principals, like, hey, he's a good kid doing this. He just made a mistake. So she, every morning when I get up, I thank God just because, just because of the places that I've been or, that I've seen. I could have been walking out of a jail cell instead of, on the other side. So, thank my family. I got a younger brother and a younger sister. But there was a point in my life when I said, obviously when I realized how much of a sacrifice my parents made to come to this country, and they're from Mexico. They're from the Nuevo Leon area. So and I just going back, I had a lot of obstacles, and just like a lot of young people out there have had. English was not my first language. I didn't get out of ESL classes till I was in the 5th grade. But just, born and raised here in Dallas, grew up in the Oak Cliff area. I went to DISD schools. I went to Skyline High School because I thought I was going to be a mechanic.
Fernie went to Skyline.
We were talking about that earlier. I was in the automotive cluster, but, like I said, I wasn't always the best student, didn't always do what I was supposed to, but, I didn't let that stop me. So I continued to work hard. I actually graduated from Duncanville High School. And, it was there that changed that for me. That was kind of my life-changing, experience that I had. And I realized, I'm a smart kid or whatever, and I can do stuff. I just apply myself and work hard. And, doors just kind of started opening up for me from that point forward. And, I was the first in my family to graduate high school. And I did it for my parents, really. And for my brother, I knew that if I succeeded, I knew he was very competitive. He was always trying to outdo me. I knew he was going to try to outdo me, and so I did it for my family. Worked hard. Sometimes it's easy, because your friends want to go out, to the parties and do that. But sometimes you got to say no, because you got to,
Hector, you're preaching to the choir, man. That was all me.
So I made it. I graduated from Duncanville High School, got accepted at UTA, kind of learned trial by fire. It's not something that, like I said, my family, they had a elementary school education, and kind of had to work my way. I remember going into, going into the and I didn't have a computer at home or whatnot, but went into the I guess where you go out and you ask financial aid, and I'm saying, hey, look, I'm just seeing if you guys have some scholarships for me. And they said, no, we don't have anything. I'm like, okay. So that was the end of that. I actually said, well, I'm going to pay my way through college and just worked with criminal defense attorneys because I had goals. I mean, I knew where I wanted to be and what I was going to do. Obviously, you got to be open to different opportunities, popping up. But, I had some goals. So I worked with criminal defense attorneys. And at the time, UT Arlington was only $2,500 a semester. And I was able to pay my way through that. And, I met some attorneys. Met actually a good friend of mine, Judge Ernest White, who's now, if I get elected in the 195th, he's going to be my next door neighbor. And I met him when he was office sharing with the attorney that I was working for when I was in undergrad. And I got to know him, and then I applied to SMU, and next thing you know, I'm accepted at SMU. And from there on, it's just working hard, getting more doors opening, and just keeping focused on my goals, where I wanted to be down the road. And for that change, I mean, I was expecting to do criminal defense, but I felt I've done a lot of good for the community just being a prosecutor.
That's wonderful, man. You talked about your parents coming from Mexico. Were they already together when they came from Mexico, or did they meet here?
No, they actually they were together. They got married. They came down here.
Okay.
I was born here in Dallas. I was born in Parkland.
Yeah.
And then my grandparents would come down here. They'd work the fields, and so I know sometimes we lived in Chicago, Keegan, for a while, and but eventually traveling around a little bit, and then just came back and just pretty much settled here in the Dallas area. Started off in East Dallas, and then my grandparents, bought a house in Oak Cliff, and then pretty much all their children moved to Oak Cliff.
Your grandparents on your dad's side, your mom's side?
My dad's side.
Okay. And
my mom's side, I'm sorry.
What does your dad primarily do, or what has he kind of done?
My dad has he's been a blue collar worker. He's basically done maintenance. He did maintenance for Friendly Chevrolet.
Okay.
For a number of years. I remember going to help him in the summers, just kind of going out there with him, washing cars and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then his boss from that place went to another company, a trucking company, and he called my dad because he knew my dad was a hard worker, and took him over there. And they've been friends there forever. And his boss just retired, but he still keeps in contact with my dad. So.
And your mom?
My mom, she was a seamstress at the time for a while. Then she went into what do you call it? She did haircuts and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, and right now she's just taking care of my two boys.
Okay.
So
how cool. Now, family, I know they come up. You'd mentioned your grandparents coming up as well and bringing the family. You have additional extended family, cousins and aunts and uncles around?
Yeah, I mean, we're a big family. We got lots of uncles, lots of cousins. On both sides, my mom's dad and my dad's, my mom's side and my dad's side. They're all here in Dallas. Most of them are here in Dallas County. So, but yeah, big family. We
were talking earlier, Hector, about kind of the interplay. You'd mentioned that you'd actually worked with my sister, for a period of time when she was at Catholic Charities, and I think she started down in the Valley in immigration, then she came back up and worked for an immigration attorney for a period, and then was at Catholic Charities. So you were actually in law school and kind of interning with her and doing some things there. You had mentioned why you were kind of interested in doing that. Tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of interrelates with running for judge.
No, absolutely. I mean, at the time, like I said, I was going to be a criminal defense attorney. I'd been working with attorneys, so I kind of knew that immigration issues greatly affect, like if you plead guilty to an offense, that's greatly going to affect your immigration status if you're here in the country. If you're a resident or whatnot. So I knew in order to be prepared to come out of law school and represent and represent people the right way, I had to be familiar with some of those issues. So I took it upon myself to do an internship at Catholic Charities so I could understand some of those immigration consequences. I think it's imperative, especially, obviously for our community, because a lot of times, not understanding the language, it's real easy for people to not understand and then just kind of want to dispose of their criminal case as quickly as possible without really understanding the consequences of it. And so obviously, if you plead guilty to a criminal offense, you are subject to deportation.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously that's your specialty. You know that, but you know, so it's you know, I wanted to make sure that I was properly advising them. I mean, as a judge, I think it's imperative that you inform them of those rights.
Yeah.
Because I mean, someone may say, well, if I'd have known that this was going to cause me and my family to be uprooted from this country and deported, I would have just taken it to trial.
Yeah.
But I thought it was the easier way out. So just to be informed, it's very important that you have that also, that immigration knowledge in
Yeah.
order to be able to help somebody.
And in all honesty, you know, the reality is, you know, not everybody's accused of a crime, of course, is guilty of a crime or
Right.
actually committed the crime. You know, there's everybody has a role. You know, prosecutors have a role in terms of what they do. Judges have a role in terms of the way you know, they go forward and the way they move. Criminal defense attorneys, same deal. So in the context of what you're talking about, certainly people who may not necessarily have committed the crime, it's the prosecutor's role to kind of say, hey, look, well, I gotta move my docket and I gotta do these things, and you know, we may not have the greatest evidence in the world, but we're willing to go to trial. But I tell you what, you know, look at this deal. And someone who may otherwise really not be, you know, may not have committed the crime, may be talked into perhaps by a criminal defense attorney who may not know for sure whether or not they committed the crime either, and told, hey, look, just do this. And then all of a sudden they're in a position where, well, I thought I was going to get probation for a period of time, and then all of a sudden, you know, I'm being deported to, you know, a country that I don't know. So the reality is this happens in our system, you know, in terms of what's there. What do you think? You mentioned the judge's role. You've been a prosecutor for a period of time, and of course, you know, you've got an obligation to the state. You've got an obligation to the people of the state to go after individuals, you know, in terms of and certainly taking into consideration whether or not they're actually guilty of the offense and what you can prove, things of that nature. But as a judge, that role is going to slightly change in terms of what it is you're looking at. So in that context, tell me what kind of judge you think you would be in terms of you know, some judges I know actually read, you know, some of the rights out to the defendants, or maybe do it in their language or some other thing. Some are just, you know, counsel, did you prepare your client, things of that nature. What type of role do you think you would, or what kind of judge would you look like if you were on the bench?
Obviously, that's immigration issues have always affected me just because of where I come from and who I come from. But so I think, I mean, obviously it would have been a detriment. I mean, I probably wouldn't be here if something like that happened to my family. Because they were residents at one point. So I could definitely understand that. It's something that's important to me. I'd be the ones that makes sure that they understand the consequences. And, you know, I've seen it. I've seen both. I've seen, you know, and if, you know, obviously, I mean, you know, Judge Labario was great about affording them the right to go and speak to an immigration attorney. If the criminal lawyer hadn't already done that. So that's something that's, like I said, it's important to me, that it's going to be, that should be important to everybody, because it not only affects the person in front of you at the courthouse, in the courtroom, but it also affects that person's family. So,
man, I tell you what, I remember 9/11, you know, pretty vividly, and I was in my office, and after 9/11, I just remember the courthouses just changing in terms of what judges were doing. We're hearing about judges who, you know, were asking, are you here documented, you undocumented, and actually, you know, trying to contact immigration to have people deported. Like, judges, you know, felt like that was their obligation after that period of time. So there's certainly a transition in terms of the way people view the world. Certainly from the judge's box, things can change, the world kind of change. And, you know, from my practice, I've been practicing for 20 years, and I've really seen, you know, back in 96, 97, I was feeling pretty comfortable in my own skin. You know, I was feeling pretty good about being a Latino and being, hey, we're good, and then all of a sudden something changed. You know, the dynamic shifted. Certainly 9/11 had something to do with it, but then also, quite honestly, you know, there was a new sense of, hey, immigrants are bad, and we're going to the Republican Party is going to maintain its grip based on, you know, exposing this element. And before that, you know, we were wonderful and they were backbone of society, and then all of a sudden, you know, everything kind of changed. So in all honesty, from my perspective, in terms of what I see, you coming on as a judge, you telling me the history of you know, kind of the things that you've kind of been through and seen, there's a true empathy. There can be an empathy for people in situations. And And I just wanted to applaud, that sense of where you come from and the type of judge that you might become. Let's talk a little bit, Hector, if we can, about you mentioned earlier that you were kind of vetted, among 6 or 7 candidates that were vying for the Democratic nod. And out of those people, the precinct chairs chose you instead of those other folks, based, I would imagine, on experience and leadership and all the things that they kind of collectively came together on. How close was the vote? Do you know, or did they tell you?
Yeah, no. So basically, I was the other candidates. One was a former judge. One was a current sitting judge that was sitting in one of the specialty courts, and had 3 defense attorneys, and I believe there were 3 or 4 defense attorneys, and then me. I was a prosecutor. And but the way the process kind of all kind of went down is, the precinct chairs was gonna, were the ones that are gonna decide who the nominee was gonna be. Right. So, and I can't speak. I think we were all doing the same stuff, but I can't speak for what they did exactly. I can speak as what I did. Right off the bat, when I decided, I notified my supervisors what I was doing, and at that point, I just started reaching out by phone, in person, to all the precinct chairs. At the time, there was 350-something precinct chairs. So just started making phone calls, went to some doors, knocked on some doors, at some meetings, and I already knew some from before. And then just talked to them, got them to see who I was, gave them my qualifications and why I was running. And so basically on August 13th, when they came together, right off the bat, I kind of knew that there was going to be a runoff between the top 2 vote getters because there was just so many of us. So the top 2, I was one of them. I got 60 votes, and the other person got 63 votes. Okay. Once I felt pretty good about going into the runoff, and then I felt that if I went into the runoff, I would have a really good chance of winning. Yeah. At the end of the day, when they voted the second time, I got 131. My opponent got 100. Okay. So it was a majority vote. So, but it was basically just getting to know everybody, kind of giving them my message, who I was, right, and then just convincing them to vote for me.
Okay. And so people can kind of understand in just the context in which that was. It was a judge was retiring, kind of leaving the bench, so there's just vacancy. That they would kind of need to fill. So they had to get both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, a candidate to kind of figure out who was going to run in the general election, which of course is November 8th, the election date. So you're going up against a Republican candidate. And we talked a little bit about the distinctions between, a criminal court and a civil court. And I don't think people always understand that. Now, civil court, it's a lot of what I do. So it's a lot of the cases that are non-criminal. The state isn't going after you. It's usually 2 parties have a disagreement, and then they kind of go to court to kind of figure those things out. And in all honesty, I don't think people always realize the big differences. There's just huge differences. A lot of our procedural rules may kind of coalesce, but quite honestly, there's a big difference. Big difference between practicing civil and criminal law. So the individual on the other side that you're kind of running against has been a civil attorney, civil trial attorney, and maybe a decent one, but a civil trial attorney. Hasn't really had that criminal background, even in the practice of representing individuals in a criminal context. I know that he's actually run for a civil bench on a few occasions. So how do you think that kind of, I know you don't want to necessarily talk badly about anybody, but in all honesty, when you're running for a certain bench, I would think you'd want somebody who has a specific background and kind of knowledge about how everything interplays, how it works. So how would you kind of distinguish yourself from your candidate? Not necessarily want to badmouth him, but in terms of experience.
No, I just think it's someone who bakes cakes, someone who builds furniture. They could both build things, but one of them's going to be better than the other, because they've just kind of had that background and they've worked to get there. So same thing with civil and criminal. There's some, you got to follow some steps and whatnot to get there in trials. But I think just my experience every day, for the last, since 2000, it's back since like 2001, 1999. I mean, and then for the last 11 years or so, I've been at the criminal courthouse every day. I've gotten to cross-examine defendants. I've interviewed witnesses. I've interviewed officers. I've argued before the judge. I've gotten to see the day-to-day operations at the criminal courthouse. And whereas my opponent has not, he's been in the civil courthouse. So I think it's important to. I mean, you just can't one day switch and say, okay, I'm gonna be a criminal lawyer and a criminal judge, and because there's going to be a learning curve. So I think I've prepared myself for that's the next logical step. And I think I've had the background just every day learning from other judges, learning from other attorneys, learning from other prosecutors about the inner workings, and just being a judge. I mean, you can't just take the job and say I'm going to learn on the job, because I mean, you're talking about life or death situations in those capital murder cases. You're talking about punishment ranges that lead up to life in prison. So you got to be ready. It can't be one of those things where I'm going to learn on the job as I go.
You how many trials have you had?
Probably about 100.
100 trials. And just to kind of give people an understanding of that, I mean, 100 trials for in the as a prosecutor, of course, prosecutors are going to try more cases, but just overall in terms of attorneys, we're trying a lot less cases than we used to. So someone who's had 100 trials, that's a whole lot, quite honestly, and people don't always realize that. 1, 2, 3. I bet the average number of people who are trying cases, you put civil and criminal, cases together, someone does 50 in a lifetime, and that's a lot of trials, quite honestly, just because, although we are attorneys, a lot of the practice is not actually trial work. So incredible experience and exposure to the criminal bench and the things that you've done with respect to that, Hector. We are going to take in a couple of minutes just a real short break, Hector. When we come back, I really want to talk to you about maybe some specifics about the bench. You've kind of touched upon a little bit about having an understanding of where people are coming from and being fair and things of that nature, but we're going to probably touch upon that a little bit more, and we're going to do that in about 2 minutes. So you guys be sure to come back and join us. Our guest right now is Mr. Hector Garza, running for the 195th Judicial District Court. Thank you so much, and y'all come back.